The letter wasn't meant to be found. At least, that's what Claire Dawson told herself every year she wrote one. Every October. On the same day, she sat at the far corner table of the Salem Public Library, an old brick building that still smelled faintly of dust and salt air, and wrote to her late husband, Eli. She always used the same yellow stationery, the kind that bled slightly when the ink was wet. And when she finished, she folded the page neatly, sealed it, and tucked it inside the back cover of a random library book. Then she walked away. It was her ritual, her way of talking to him without anyone hearing. But that year, the letter didn't stay buried. Claire worked the morning shift at the Dockside Cafe, a small coffee shop near the wharf. It was the kind of place where the same regulars came in every day: fishermen, retired teachers, tourists lost in the wrong part of town. The coffee was average. The view was spectacular. Her 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, sat at the corner table, coloring. A small bell jingled whenever the door opened, and the smell of salt water blew in through the cracks of the old windows. Double espresso. Extra shot, said a voice she didn't recognize. Claire looked up and froze. The man standing in front of her was too sharply dressed for Salem. Tall, mid-30s, suit jacket, no tie, eyes like steel-colored glass. He smiled politely. You're out of almond milk. Sorry, she said quickly. Regular, okay. He nodded, watching her too carefully. Like he was studying something he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. When she slid the cup across the counter, he didn't take it right away. Instead, he said, I think this belongs to you. He reached into his coat pocket and set a folded letter on the counter. Her letter, the same yellow paper, the same ink. Her handwriting, she went cold. Where did you get that? In a copy of The Winter's Tale, he said. Salem Public Library. You wrote it on October 12th. You signed it. See? Her breath caught. That's not supposed to be found, he finished. She said nothing. He studied her face for a long time before saying quietly, I'm sorry if this is intrusive. I read it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The cafe was suddenly too small. Claire grabbed the letter, her fingers shaking. You shouldn't have read it, I know. Then why did you? He hesitated, eyes darkening. Because I lost someone too. And I didn't know how to say goodbye until I read your words. She froze for a moment. All she heard was the ocean outside, the low hum of the tide, the creak of the docks, the faint laughter of people who still had reasons to laugh. Finally, she found her voice. You shouldn't have come here. I didn't plan to, he said. I just wanted to thank you. You wrote something that sounded like breathing again after drowning. She blinked, not sure whether to cry or scream. Who are you? He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because he didn't want to say Daniel Mercer, he said finally. The name landed like a weight between them. Even in a town like Salem, she'd heard it before. Daniel Mercer, the reclusive CEO of Mercer Biotech, the billionaire who disappeared from the public eye after his wife died in a car crash 2 years ago. People said he'd gone mad. Others said he'd gone kind, and now he was standing in her cafe, holding her grief in his hands like it belonged to him. Why me? She whispered. He looked down at the cup of coffee, untouched, steam fading. Because you wrote to someone you lost, he said. And I realized I never did. Claire stared at him, this stranger who somehow knew the most private thing about her life. You don't even know me. I know how it feels to miss someone so much that silence starts to sound like them. Her throat tightened. She turned away before he could see her cry. When she looked back, he was gone. Only the letter remained, lying open on the counter, the ink slightly smudged where his thumb had touched it that night. After Sophie was asleep, Claire reread what she'd written. The words looked different now, like someone had turned them into something alive. She thought about the man with sad eyes and expensive shoes, about how he'd said breathing again after drowning. And though she told herself it was impossible, some part of her, the part that still believed in ghosts, wondered if Eli had somehow sent him. Daniel came back 3 days later. It was early morning, fog still clinging to the docks, the smell of rain and roasted beans filling the air. Claire was wiping down tables, pretending she didn't check the door every time it opened. He stood there again, hands in his pockets, wearing that same quiet expression that didn't quite fit his expensive clothes. "Before you tell me to leave," he said gently, "I brought something." Claire sighed. Another headline. No. He reached into his coat and placed a white envelope on the counter. A letter. She froze. The paper was unsealed, folded once, neat, deliberate. Her name wasn't on it. Just 3 words written across the top. "To the woman who still writes." He said softly, "You don't have to read it. I just thought maybe you'd want to know what it feels like on the other side." "The other side of what?" she asked. "Loss," he said simply. Yours had ink. Mine had silence. Claire looked at him for a long time. The cafe was empty except for the 2 of them. She could hear the coffee machine humming behind her, Sophie's crayons scratching faintly in the back booth. Finally, she took the envelope. "If this is pity, it's not," he said quickly. "It's company." He left without waiting for her to respond. For hours, the letter sat unopened on the counter while she worked, as if opening it might somehow make everything more real. But that night, after Sophie fell asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the sound of the wind brushing against the window, she unfolded it. "Claire, I don't know what you believe in anymore, but I think people who write to the dead are the ones still brave enough to believe they're listening. I didn't write when my wife died. I spoke at a funeral I barely remember, answered emails I didn't read, smiled for cameras I hated. But I never said goodbye. I saw your letter and realized grief doesn't end. It just changes shape, so this is mine. My goodbye, and my thank you for reminding me that words can still reach the living." She didn't realize she was crying until she saw the water spots bloom across the ink. They blurred his handwriting, but not the feeling behind it. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was talking into a void. Someone had heard her. Someone had answered the next morning. Daniel returned again. No warning, just quiet footsteps and the faint scent of rain. She looked up from the register. "You read it," he said. She nodded, eyes still red. "I did." He hesitated. "Was it too much?" "No," she whispered. "It was enough." He exhaled, relieved. "Good." They stood in silence, the air between them charged with something fragile but alive. Finally, she asked, "Why here? Why not somewhere people don't stare?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Because this is where the letter began." Sophie ran out from the back, tugging at Claire's apron. "Mum, can I show him my picture?" Claire blinked. "What picture?" Sophie held up a crayon drawing, stick figures standing by the ocean. 3 of them. "That's you," Sophie said, pointing. "That's me. And that's him." Daniel knelt down, surprised. "Me? Yeah," she said proudly. "You look sad." "But Mum says sometimes sad people just need pancakes." He laughed, a real, unguarded sound. She might be right. Claire smiled, despite herself. She usually is. That afternoon, as Daniel left, he paused by the door. "Would it be all right if I came by again? Not to talk business, just coffee." Claire hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to protect the fragile balance she'd built. But something about the way he said just coffee felt like a promise, not a threat. "Okay," she said quietly. He smiled. "Then I'll see you soon, Claire Dawson, the woman who still writes." And when the door closed behind him, she realized she was smiling too. It started with coffee. One morning turned into three. Three turned into a week. And before Claire realized it, Daniel Mercer had a usual at the dockside calf. He always sat at the same table by the window, where the morning light hit just enough to catch the edge of his sleeve. He always ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream. And he always brought a book, not the kind of book a billionaire would carry. No finance, no philosophy. Paperbacks worn, second-hand, dog-eared at the corners. When she finally asked why, he just smiled. "Because people's fingerprints live on used books," he said. "Makes me feel less alone." At first, their conversations were small. Weather, coffee blends, the harbor's tide schedule. But little by little, they started trading pieces of themselves. The kind that don't fit into small talk. He told her he used to. Wake up at 4 a.m. every day, old corporate. Habit, he said, even though he had no meetings left to attend. She told him about Sophie's obsession with rainbows and how she swore the color pink could fix everything. He said he envied that kind of faith. She said he looked like someone who used to have it. Sometimes he came when the cafe was empty, when the rain drummed on the roof and the world outside felt too big. On those days, she'd sit across from him after closing, and they'd talk without looking at each other, just the way two people do, when they're afraid to be seen too clearly. One night, she asked quietly, "Do you ever miss it? The company? The noise? The people calling you sir?" He shook his head. "No, I miss being needed." "That's different." She studied him. "People still need you." He smiled faintly. "Do they? Or do they just need what I can give them?" She didn't have an answer, and maybe he didn't want one. Sophie adored him, of course. She'd run to the door whenever the bell rang, shouting, "It's him," before he even stepped inside. Daniel started bringing her little gifts, not toys, but stories. A paper crane he folded from a receipt. A pebble shaped like a heart from the beach. A single daisy pressed between book pages. Claire pretended to disapprove. But she couldn't help smiling when she saw Sophie tuck those treasures under her pillow each night. One afternoon, after the lunch rush, Daniel lingered as she wiped tables. He was staring out at the rain, that quiet, thoughtful way he had when the world looked like a memory. "You ever notice," he said softly, "how the ocean and the sky are the same color when it rains?" She looked up. "Yeah, you can't tell where one ends." He nodded slowly. "That's what grief feels like sometimes. Like standing in the middle of both and not knowing which way is up." Claire stopped what she was doing. "You talk like someone's still there." He turned to her, eyes tired, unguarded. "Maybe I am." That night, after she locked up, she found him still sitting outside on the bench. coat collar turned up against the drizzle. "You could have gone home," she said. He gave a faint smile. "Didn't want to. Why?" He looked at her, really looked this time. "Because home's where you stop pretending you're fine. And this feels close." For a long time, neither spoke. The rain softened around them, slow, steady, forgiving. Finally, she asked the question that had been sitting in her throat for days. What was her name? Daniel hesitated. Then he said, almost in a whisper, too beautiful to say out loud. And just like that, the air shifted. Claire didn't press him. She didn't need to, because in that moment, she understood. The man who found her letter wasn't looking for her. He was looking for permission to feel again. Part 2, Segment 2. The silence between sentences. The first letter wasn't planned. Daniel left it under her coffee cup one morning. No envelope. No signature, just folded notebook paper that smelled faintly of rain and cologne. Claire, you once wrote that silence can be louder than any word. I used to think silence was peace. Now I know it's punishment. You asked me once what her name was. It was Lena. She laughed too loud and never finished her tea. When she died, I tried to keep her world running, her projects, her foundation, her house. But no matter how much I built, it all stayed empty. I think that's why your letter found me. Maybe grief isn't about holding on. Maybe it's about being found. Claire read it 3 times before she breathed again. After that, the letters became their language. Some days she'd find one under her register drawer, sometimes in the pocket of her apron, sometimes taped to the back of a chair before closing. And she started writing back, Daniel, you said, grief is about being found. Maybe, but it's also about the people who leave without saying goodbye. Eli didn't get to. It wasn't his fault. Car accident, middle of nowhere, but sometimes I get mad at him anyway. I think that's what love does when it has nowhere to go. See, she didn't expect him to answer. But the next day, there it was. Claire, maybe love never leaves. Maybe it just changes houses. Weeks slipped by like that. Paper bridges between 2 people too scared to speak what their hearts already knew. The cafe regulars started to notice the change. Claire smiled more. Daniel stayed longer. Even Sophie asked, Mum, is he your friend now or still a customer? Claire had no answer. One evening, when the sky turned the color of copper, Daniel came in late after the rush, after closing time. He looked different, restless. Long day. She asked long year, he murmured. She smiled faintly. You should sit. I can't, he said. Not tonight. Something in his voice made her stop. He set another letter on the counter. This one's for when I'm gone. Her stomach dropped. Gone where? Just a few days, he said. There's something I need to see. Or maybe something I need to let go of. Daniel, he cut her off, gently. I just want to know if missing someone feels the same twice. When he left, she stared at the folded letter for a long time before opening it. Claire, the first time I lost someone, it felt like the world stopped. This time, it feels like it's waiting. You've given me something I didn't expect. The sound of quiet that doesn't hurt. I'll be back when I understand what that means. The cafe felt emptier without him. She still wiped the same tables, poured the same coffee, smiled at the same people. But the silence he left behind had weight. Each morning, Sophie asked, Where's Mr. Daniel? And Claire always said, He's away for a bit, sweetheart. He'll be back. even though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. On the third night, unable to sleep, Claire found herself back at the library. The same table, the same pen. She opened a blank page and began to write. Daniel, I used to think letters were just for ghosts. But maybe they're for the living too, for people brave enough to read what others can't say out loud. Wherever you are, I hope you found something worth keeping. And if you come back, I'll be here. She slipped it into the back of the Winter's Tale again, the same place where everything had begun, and for the first time, she didn't cry. She just smiled, softly, into the silence. Daniel came back on a Thursday. The sky was clear, sharp with cold, the kind of blue that only existed after rain. Claire was restocking the pastry case when she saw him through the glass, standing on the sidewalk, hands in pockets, that familiar stillness in his shoulders. He hadn't changed much, but something about him had. He looked lighter, as if he'd been carrying a weight that finally learned how to rest. She walked outside before she could talk herself out of it. You're late, she said, trying for lightness, but failing. I got lost, he said, on purpose. Did you find what you were looking for? He smiled, not the polished one from magazine covers, but something small, human. Not exactly. But I found what I could live without. They sat inside by the window, like always. The first few minutes were awkward. Too many words waiting to be said, and none of them ready. Finally, Claire broke the silence. Sophie asked about you every morning. Daniel's eyes softened. How's her rainbow collection? Growing, she said. She's decided pink is for courage now. He chuckled quietly. She's probably right. After a while, she asked what she'd been afraid to. Where did you go? Home, he said simply. If you can still call it that. She waited. I hadn't been there since Lena's funeral. It still smelled like her perfume. He looked down, twisting the ring on his finger, thin, silver, worn. I packed her clothes, her books, even her old teacups. And when the house was empty, I finally said goodbye out loud. Claire's throat tightened. That must have been hard. It was, he said softly, but silence was harder. The cafe was quiet, filled only with the faint sound of rain starting again outside. Claire reached for the counter behind her, needing something to hold. Did it help? She asked. He nodded. It didn't bring her back, but it brought me back. Then, almost as if afraid the words would vanish, he added, You did that, Claire. She looked up, startled. I don't think I could have gone back there if you hadn't taught me that letters can still reach the living. She wanted to speak, but her voice came out as a whisper. I didn't do anything. You did, he said gently. You listened. That night, after closing, he stayed to help her clean, something he'd never done before. They worked in silence, their movements syncing naturally, as if they'd done this 100 times. When the last chair was stacked, she handed him a towel. You don't have to help, I know, he said, but I want to. She smiled faintly. You're terrible at wiping tables. He grinned. Years of boardrooms, not broomsticks. She laughed, the sound soft but real. And, for the first time since Eli's death, laughter didn't make her feel guilty. They stepped outside after locking up. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet leaves and salt. Daniel looked out toward the harbor. You ever think about leaving this town? Sometimes, she admitted, but Sophie loves it here. And me. She hesitated. I think I stopped looking for better places when he died. He turned to her. Maybe better isn't a place. Maybe it's just someone who makes you stay. She met his eyes. The quiet intensity there made her chest tighten. Daniel, she said softly, you don't need to find me again. His brow furrowed. I'm right here, she finished. The wind carried her words between them, fragile, but unbreakable, and for the first time, Daniel didn't look like a man passing through. He looked like a man coming home. The first chill of November crept into town. Morning fog rolled over the harbor like breath, and the cafe windows steamed with warmth. Daniel had started coming in early, before customers, before the world woke up. Sometimes he helped grind the beans. Sometimes he just sat in silence, watching Claire move her hair tucked messily behind her ear. Her sleeves rolled past her elbows, her face calm in the soft light. She had become the sound of morning, and he didn't realize how much he needed that until now. One evening, after closing, Claire went to the back room to grab something. She left her notebook open on the counter, the old one she used to write her private letters in, its corners soft, the paper yellowed from time. Daniel wasn't snooping. He just noticed the page fluttering as the fan hummed overhead. A few words caught his eye, ink faded but still legible. I told you not to drive that night. I told you I'd come get you. You laughed and said I worried too much. If I hadn't let you go, you'd still be here. His chest tightened. He read no further. He closed the notebook gently, as if the words themselves were alive, fragile, breathing. Later, when Claire came back, she noticed the book had been moved. Her eyes flicked up to him, searching. Did you? He didn't lie. I saw a page. Her face went still. Then you know. I know you've been carrying something you shouldn't have to. She turned away, pretending to wipe a counter that didn't need wiping. You think it's easy to just stop. No, he said softly. I think it's impossible. Until someone reminds you you're allowed to. She didn't answer. Her throat ached with everything she wanted to say. The night of the accident, the phone call that came too late, the guilt that became her shadow. Finally, she whispered, he called me before it happened. Said the fog was thick, said he might stay at a motel. I told him no to come home. I made him drive back. If I hadn't, Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm but quiet. Claire, you didn't make him die. Her eyes glistened. Then why does it feel like I did? Because you loved him, Daniel said. And love never dies quietly. That night, he didn't go home. They sat together in the dark cafe, a single lamp glowing near the counter, the rain whispering against the glass. Neither spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to fix, just things to understand. At some point, she fell asleep on his shoulder, her breathing slow, steady. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't dream of loss. He dreamt of light, the kind that comes after a long night of silence, when he left before dawn. He slipped a folded note beneath her cup. It wasn't signed, but she knew it was his. Claire. I read one letter that wasn't mine, so I owe you one, that is. You were not the reason it ended. You're the reason I still believe it can begin again. When she found it the next morning, she pressed it to her chest and closed her eyes. The guilt didn't disappear, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like forgiveness finally had a place to land, and though she didn't say it out loud, the words formed anyway, soft, trembling, but true. Thank you for finding me, Daniel. Winter came early that year. By late November, the harbor froze in patches, The wind smelled like salt and iron. And the mornings at Dockside Calf began in silence, the kind that came with heavy coats and breath that turned white. Daniel still came, though not as often. He'd begun taking calls again, long ones, quiet ones, the kind filled with words that never made it into headlines. Claire didn't ask what they were about, but she could feel something shifting. He was leaving again. This time, not because he needed to, but because he was being pulled back into the world he'd walked away from. One evening, just before closing, he lingered by the door. "I have to go to New York for a while," he said. It was casual, but the way his hands tightened around his coffee cup betrayed him. For how long? A few weeks. Maybe more. The board's been patient, but they won't wait forever. Claire nodded, trying to sound neutral. Of course. "You're needed there," he hesitated. "That's not why I'm going." She looked up. "Then why?" He smiled faintly, almost apologetic. "Because if I don't go, I'll never know if I can come back for the right reason." Her chest ached, but she forced a small smile. "Then go, just. Don't forget where we keep the sugar." He laughed, quiet, grateful. "I won't forget." The morning he left, the cafe felt colder. Sophie sat by the window, watching the snow fall. "Is Mr. Daniel coming today?" "Not today, sweetheart," Claire said softly. "He's on a trip." Sophie frowned. "Did he forget us?" "No," Claire whispered. "Sometimes people go away to find a way back." The days stretched long without him. The sound of the doorbell felt heavier, emptier. Every customer's voice carried an echo that wasn't his, at night. When the cafe was dark, Claire caught herself writing again, not letters to Eli, but to Daniel. She never sent them, never even addressed them. But the words poured out anyway. "Daniel, you said you wanted to know if missing someone feels the same twice. It doesn't. The first time hurts because you lose something you can't replace. The second time hurts because you've found something you're afraid to lose again." See, a week later, a letter arrived in the cafe's mailbox. No return address, no name, just her handwriting on the front. Somehow knowing it was his, inside, one short sentence in his careful script, "I miss our silence." She stared at the words for a long time, for simple ones, that made her throat tighten and her hands tremble. No one had ever missed silence with her before. No one had ever loved her in that quiet, steady way that didn't demand anything in return. By mid-December, the snow fell heavier. Claire worked longer hours, losing herself in routine. But every sound, every creak of the door, every hum of the espresso machine, felt like a reminder that something, someone was missing. One night, after closing, she went down to the docks. The water was frozen near the edges, reflecting the dim light from the lampposts. She stood there, coat pulled tight, letter still folded in her pocket. It was strange how distance could make a person's presence louder than ever. She looked out at the dark horizon and whispered, "Come home, Daniel." Her breath turned to fog and drifted into the air, a message the wind would carry wherever he was. Meanwhile, in a glass tower hundreds of miles away, Daniel sat in his office, surrounded by city lights and noise. The skyline glittered, but he couldn't feel any of it. On his desk lay a single piece of paper, her letter folded neatly, edges worn. He traced the words with his thumb, as if by doing so he could feel her again. He'd thought coming back here would remind him who he was before her. Instead, All it did was remind him how hollow success sounded without her voice beside it. Late that night, his assistant knocked. "Mr. Mercer, the board wants a decision by morning." Daniel looked up slowly. "On what?" "Whether you'll stay permanently as CEO." He stared out the window. The snow was falling, even here, faint, lonely against the glass. He took a breath and said quietly, "Tell them I'll decide after Christmas." Because in his heart, he already knew the only place he wanted to be by Christmas was where the silence didn't hurt. Christmas lights went up early that year. Tiny bulbs twinkled in the cafe window, reflecting off the frost that painted every edge of glass. Claire hung paper snowflakes with Sophie, pretending the ache in her chest wasn't loneliness. Sophie held up a crooked snowflake proudly. "Do you think Mr. Daniel will see it?" Claire hesitated, tying a string tighter than she needed to. "I think, if he could, he'd like it." The truth was, she hadn't heard from him in weeks. No letters, no calls, only that one sentence that had replayed in her mind every night: "I miss our silence." On Christmas Eve morning, the cafe was nearly empty. The regulars had gone home to families and fireplaces, leaving behind only the smell of cinnamon and espresso. Snow began to fall, soft and slow, flakes the size of petals. Claire stood behind the counter, lost in thought, when the delivery bell jingled. A man in a thick coat placed a small brown package on the counter. "For you, ma'am," he said. "No sender listed." She frowned. "Are you sure it's mine?" He nodded. "Says Dockside Calf. Attention, the woman who still writes." Her heart stopped for a beat. The package was small, carefully wrapped, tied with a silver ribbon. Inside, she found an old photograph, faded, edges curled, taken from the same harbor outside. Two figures stood by the docks, one holding a coffee cup, one laughing with wind in her hair. At the bottom corner, a date: November 14th, the day Daniel first walked into her life. She turned the photo over. On the back, in his handwriting, only one line: "For when you forget what home looks like." Her breath caught. It wasn't the photo that broke her. It was the knowing. He had seen her the way no one had in years. He'd seen her as home. The bell above the door chimed softly. She looked up, half expecting it to be another customer, maybe someone wanting coffee before the storm. But at WASN, single quotes to, Daniel stood there, snow in his hair, two steaming cups in his hands. He looked exhausted and alive all at once. The wind howled behind him, but inside, everything went still. Claire whispered, "You're here." He nodded, breath visible in the cold air. "I tried to stay away." He paused, the corner of his mouth lifting. "I couldn't." She stepped around the counter slowly, unsure if she was dreaming. "New York get tired of you." "Something like that," he said. "Turns out silence sounds different there. Lonelier." He smiled faintly. Colder, she exhaled, the tension she'd carried for weeks melting into the warmth between them. "You could have called. I could have," he said softly. "But I didn't want to hear your voice through a line. I wanted to see it in person." Sophie came running from the back, wearing reindeer pajamas and clutching a cookie. "Mr. Daniel," she squealed. "You came back." He knelt down, grinning. "Wouldn't miss Christmas pancakes, would I?" She threw her arms around his neck, and for a moment, the world outside vanished, just the sound of laughter and the soft thud of snow against the window. Later, after closing, Claire poured them both coffee and sat across from him. The cafe was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. The lights above cast a warm glow on the table, on the photo lying between them. "You sent this," she said. He nodded. "I wanted you to remember what you look like when you're happy." She stared at the picture. "You make it sound like I forgot." He looked at her, eyes steady, voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes the ones who smile the most are the ones who need reminding." Her throat tightened. "And what about you? Who reminds you?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You do." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, softly, she said, "You didn't just come back for coffee, did you?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. Inside was a letter. Her handwriting, not his. The one she'd left weeks ago in the Winter's Tale. She gasped. You found it." He nodded. "You told me you'd be here if I came back. And you believed that." He smiled gently. "I wanted to." The snow thickened outside, falling in steady white curtains. Inside, warmth spread from the cups to their hands to the space between them. For the first time in a long while, Claire didn't feel like someone waiting to be left behind, and Daniel didn't feel like someone trying to outrun the past. They were just two people sitting in a small town cafe, while the world outside turned white, and the snow, like memory, remembered everything. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. By the time the plows cleared Main Street, Dockside Calf looked like something out of a postcard, soft lights glowing through frost, the smell of cocoa and cinnamon spilling into the cold. Daniel hadn't left since Christmas Eve. He worked from one of the corner tables, laptop open but rarely touched. Sophie had started calling that spot his office. He didn't correct her. One morning, Claire found him outside shoveling snow before she opened. He was terrible at it, bundled in too many layers, hair damped with frost, smiling like an idiot every time she told him he missed a spot. "You're going to catch pneumonia," she said, handing him a coffee. He grinned. "Worth it. For what?" He looked at her, serious now. "For staying." Later that day, while Sophie napped in the back, he sat across from Claire at the counter. His expression had that quiet determination she'd come to recognize. The look of a man about to say something that would change everything. "I sold my shares," he said simply. She blinked. "What, Mercer Holdings?" "I'm out. They'll announce it next week." Her breath caught. "Daniel, that's your life." He nodded. It was. "But somewhere between losing Lena and finding your letter, I realized I'd been living in a house built out of grief. I don't want to live there anymore." She tried to speak, but he went on, voice steady. "I'm starting a foundation here. Scholarships, funding for the local school, maybe a community library. Something that lasts longer than money." Claire stared at him. "Why here?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone once told me home isn't a place you build. It's the person who waits for you to come back." For a moment, neither spoke. The espresso machine hissed quietly behind them, the only sound between two people trying not to fall apart. Claire's hands trembled. "Daniel, you don't have to do this because of me." He shook his head. "It's not because of you, Claire. It's because of me. You just reminded me what life could feel like again." Her eyes glistened. "And what if you wake up one day and realize you miss that world? The noise, the power, the speed, I won't," he said softly. Because I finally remembered what quiet feels like when it's not empty. That night, after they closed, they walked down to the harbor. The moon reflected off the ice like silver glass, and Sophie's laughter echoed faintly from the apartment upstairs. Daniel looked out at the water, his hands deep in his coat pockets. When I left New York, people said I was throwing everything away. But standing here now, I think, maybe I was just making room. For what? Claire asked. He turned toward her, snowflakes catching in his hair. For this, he said quietly. For a life that starts with something real. She swallowed hard. I don't know if I can start over, Daniel. Every time I did, it ended in goodbye. He stepped closer, eyes never leaving hers. I didn't come here to start over, Claire. I came here because I finally found where I belong. Her breath fogged the space between them, fragile, visible, disappearing into the night. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "You belong here." He smiled, small and certain. "With you?" "With us," she said, and when his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. Not this time. The wind rose off the harbor, carrying the scent of snow and salt. For the first time in years, Claire didn't feel like someone mourning what was lost. She felt like someone standing at the beginning of something worth keeping. And Daniel, the man who once found her letter, finally understood. He hadn't been looking for words all along. He'd been looking for home. Winter began to soften. By late February, the snow along Main Street melted into slush, and the smell of salt and roasted coffee replaced the cold. The cafe windows fogged again each morning, this time not from frost, but from warmth. Daniel still came early, carrying his notebook and 2 coffees. Claire still pretended to be surprised. Sophie still called him our quiet man, as if it were his name. The rhythm of their days had settled, comfortable, familiar, but not stagnant, like 2 melodies that had finally learned how to share the same song. It was Daniel's idea to start the letters never sent project. He'd been sitting at his usual table, flipping through Claire's old notebooks, when he said, "You know what people need more than coffee?" She arched an eyebrow. "A second mortgage to afford yours." He grinned. "A place to say the things they can't say anywhere else." So they started small, a box near the counter, a stack of blank stationery, a handwritten sign, letters never sent for what you never said, for who you still remember. The first few days, no one used it. Then one morning, a letter appeared, folded neatly, written in shaky CURSIVE, to my daughter, who lives 3 states away. I still keep your room ready. Then another. To the one I lost in the war, I still look for your face in crowds. And another, to myself. 10 years younger. You did the best you could. Soon the box overflowed. The whole town began writing to lovers, to ghosts, 2 versions of themselves they'd long buried. And every night, Claire and Daniel read them together, never aloud, just silently, side by side. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they cried. But mostly, they just sat there, holding the weight of other people's words, the way you'd hold a fragile thing, gently. Reverently, one night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Daniel stayed behind while Claire cleaned up. He was quiet, even for him. Something in his stillness felt heavier than usual. "What is it?" she asked, finally. He smiled faintly. "I was thinking about the first letter I found." "You mean mine?" He nodded. "If I hadn't picked up that book, if I'd chosen any other day." She cut him off gently. you would have still found me." He looked at her then, the way he always did when she said something that reached too deep, too icily. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said, "because I think the things meant for us have a way of circling back, even if we're not ready." He leaned back, eyes soft with something almost shy. "I was going to write you a letter tonight," he said quietly. "Another one," she teased. "Running out of paper yet?" He shook his head. "No, this one's different." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small folded sheet, but instead of setting it on the counter, he held it in his hand. Then slowly, he tore it in half. Claire blinked. "What are you doing?" "For once," he said, voice low, certain, "I don't need to write to be heard." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from everything he'd been holding in for too long. "I've spent years writing to people who couldn't answer," he said. "To ghosts, to memories, to myself. But you answered back. You looked up," her throat tightened. "You showed me that silence doesn't have to mean goodbye. It can mean stay, Daniel." She whispered. He smiled, that quiet, crooked smile that had started to feel like home. "Claire, I don't want to write about my life anymore. I want to live it. With you." Outside, the wind shifted. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly, as if the world itself exhaled. She didn't speak. She just reached across the counter, took his hand, and held it. No words. No letters. No silence left between them. Only warmth, and the faint hum of the espresso machine, and the sound of something beginning. Later that night, after Daniel left, Claire sat by the window. Snow drifted lightly over the harbor, melting as it touched the glass. She took out her pen, opened a fresh page in her notebook, and wrote, "Dear Daniel, this is the letter we never wrote. The one that didn't need paper to exist. The one that found us when we weren't looking. If you ever wonder what home sounds like, listen for the quiet that doesn't hurt." See. She smiled, folded the page, and didn't hide it inside a book this time. She kept it. Because this one wasn't meant to be found. It was meant to stay. Spring arrived quietly. The snow melted from the rooftops. The harbor thawed, and the first gulls returned to circle above the docks. The town woke up again, fishermen mending nets, kids biking through puddles, and a dockside calf. The bell above the door never seemed to stop ringing. Claire moved through the morning rush like music refilling mugs, wiping tables, calling out orders with a voice that carried warmth even when the room was loud. And somewhere in the corner, as always, Daniel watched her with that soft, unspoken awe. He wasn't a guest anymore. He was home. They had fallen into a rhythm that wasn't rushed, or dramatic, or fragile. It was steady, the kind that comes from two people who had already seen the worst and chosen. Anyway, to stay. Every morning, Daniel opened the cafe with her. Every afternoon, Sophie ran to him after school, covered in paint or crumbs, yelling, "Guess what I made today?" Every evening, they walked home together, the harbor lights flickering on behind them like little stars that refused to burn out. One morning, he found her sitting outside the cafe, sketchbook open, pencil moving fast. She was drawing the town, the harbor, the bookstore, the old clock tower. "Didn't know you could draw," he said, leaning against the doorframe. She shrugged. "I used to, before." "Everything," he smiled gently. "Looks like everything finally gave you back your pencil." She laughed softly. "And what about you? Still working on that foundation?" He nodded. It's called Lena's Light. She froze for a beat. Her name? He nodded again. She always wanted to build something that made people feel seen. I think this does that. Claire looked at him, really looked. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no shadow of guilt. Just peace. I'm proud of you, she said. He smiled, eyes soft. You helped me get here, Claire. You didn't try to erase her. You helped me carry her differently. She swallowed. That's what love's supposed to do, isn't it? Carry what came before, gently but forward. The foundation launched that summer. A small library in the heart of town. Big windows, shelves built by volunteers, and a wall lined with envelopes, marked letters never sent. Every visitor could read one, or leave one, or both. And at the center of the room, framed behind glass, was Claire's first letter, the one Daniel had found in the Winter's Tale. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "For the words that find us when we can't find ourselves." After the opening, Daniel found Claire standing by the harbor. The sun was setting, painting the water gold. "Do you ever miss writing them?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I think we wrote what needed to be written, and now." She smiled faintly. "Now we live what needs to be lived." He laughed softly, the sound mingling with the breeze. "You always make it sound simple." "It is," she said. "We spent so long writing to the dead. Maybe it's time we start speaking to the living." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her skin glowed warm under the fading light. "I don't think I ever told you," he said, "that the first night I found your letter, I almost put it back." She smiled, eyes bright. "And what stopped you? You wrote, 'Maybe words can reach the living.'" He paused. "And I thought maybe they just did." Claire took his hand, fingers fitting perfectly against his. "Then I guess we both found what we weren't looking for." He smiled. "Home?" she nodded. "Home." Summer settled over the harbor like a slow exhale. Children ran barefoot across the docks. The scent of salt and peaches filled the air, and dockside calf spilled laughter out onto the street inside. Claire stood behind the counter, hair tied loosely, a thin sheen of sunlight on her shoulders. The bell above the door jingled, and Daniel walked in, no longer the quiet stranger who once hid behind grief, but the man who'd learned how to stay. He carried a stack of papers under one arm. "Grant applications," he said when she raised an eyebrow. "Apparently starting a foundation means drowning in paperwork." She smiled. "You'll survive." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Only because I get free coffee." Sophie came racing from the back, pigtails bouncing. "Mum, Mr. Daniel, look what I made." She held up a crayon drawing, 3 stick figures standing in front of a building labeled Letters Library. A big blue sky stretched above them, filled with floating envelopes. "That's you," Sophie said proudly, pointing to Daniel. "And that's Mum, and that's me. And those," she pointed at the envelopes, "are all the letters people don't have to write anymore." Daniel crouched to meet her eyes. "You think people will stop writing them?" Sophie shrugged. "Maybe, if they start talking instead." He looked up at Claire. "Smart kid. She gets it from me," Claire teased, then laughed when he shot her a look. That evening, after closing, the cafe fell into its familiar quiet. The tables were clean, the lights soft, the air still heavy with the scent of sugar and rain. Daniel lingered near the counter, fingers brushing against the stack of letters they'd collected over the months. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single envelope. "This one," he said quietly, "is the last one." Claire tilted her head. "From who?" he smiled. "From me." He handed it to her, the paper warm from his hand. It wasn't sealed. He wanted her to open it now. She unfolded it slowly, eyes moving across his careful, deliberate handwriting. "Claire, I used to write to remember what I lost. Now I write to remind myself what I have. The letters, the silences, the long drives through rain. They were never about saying goodbye. They were about finding a way to say, 'I'm still here. You gave me that. You gave me here.' If one day you ever find this tucked between books or papers, I hope it reminds you that some letters don't have to be sent, because they've already arrived." Daniel She didn't realize she was crying until a tear landed on the page. He reached out, thumb brushing it away. "I told myself I'd stop writing," he said softly. "But this one, it felt right." "It is," she whispered. "It's perfect." They stood there for a while, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them. Outside, the sky was streaked with gold and violet. Inside, everything felt still, as if the world had paused just to give them this quiet moment. Claire folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the drawer, beneath the counter, next to the old photograph of the harbor, the one Daniel had given her last Christmas. "That's where it belongs," she said. He smiled. "With the beginnings," she nodded. "With the beginnings." Weeks passed, and summer faded into a gentler kind of light. The foundation grew. The town began to change. Sometimes tourists would wander into the cafe, read the plaque by the door, and ask, "Who are Claire and Daniel?" And she'd just smile and say, "People who once wrote letters," and then learned to answer them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the water, Daniel and Claire sat by the harbor with Sophie between them. The girl tossed pebbles into the tide, each one sending ripples into the fading light. Claire leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. "You ever think about the first time you saw me?" He laughed quietly. "Every day. And what did you think?" He looked at her, eyes warm. "That you looked like someone who still believed words could save people." She smiled. "And now?" He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Now I know they did." The wind carried the scent of sea and lilacs. The waves whispered against the docks. And somewhere in the cafe behind them, the drawer stayed half open, a letter resting beside a photograph. Quiet proof that sometimes the words we send out into the world come back home.